we have a number of people here who are going to be presenting, and as well, we've got two of the original authors of the Improving Quality Standard. We've got John Wilson and Graham Baker are here to join us. And we've also got people from 3 organizations that are using the standard to talk to us about their experience. We have Peter Murphy with us, the CEO of Epilepsy Ireland. We have Nessa Aylmer, from the head of compliance with Respond Housing. And we've got Wendy Mccarry, who is the CEO of Bluestack Foundation for Special Needs in Donegal. So you're all very, very welcome, and I'm very grateful to you for sharing your experiences with us today. And I suppose the other thing I just say, as these people are delivering their presentations, if any of you have a question, again, if you just pop that into the chat, we'll come back to them at the end of each of the presentations and take the questions then. Or if anything strikes you, you just load them in there and we will then deal with them as we finish each presentation. So I'd like just to start the morning off by inviting John Wilson, who I think set up the initial project that ended up with the development and the launch of the Improving Quality Standard. John, I'd like if you just tell us a bit about why you did that and where it is now. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Dermot. So yes, I'm John Wilson. Back in 2017, I think, I brought together a small project team who then created what then became Improving Quality. All of the people have been involved with Picasso, some at quite a high level. And as Picasso moved to its 4th edition, I think we were quite concerned that the learning from the previous, I think it was 9 or 10 years, didn't seem to be being brought forward into the new edition. And also the way the assessment was moving, to much more of an audit rather than a process to support organisations to actually improve their quality, which we thought was quite important. So we had this idea that maybe we could do something. We started to put together IQ, and along the way, we got in touch with Dermot because we thought it'd be interesting to have a different non-English or UK perspective. And we actually invited Dermot to come along and become part of that project team, which has subsequently morphed into the board of Improving Quality. So we launched the whole program in 2018 with a number of organisations going through a pilot, for which we had a full academic evaluation from Hertfordshire University, and started to move forward. And we're quite happy with how things are going. There seems to be a lot of interest. A lot of people have taken on board our ethos about how we started this, about trying to write something that was easy to understand, worked logically. And I hope the people who will speak in a bit will tell you what they think. Did we actually manage to meet that objective? We have a number of organisations already hold the standard. We started to have organisations reassess against the standard. So the first reassessment happened at the end of last year. And currently, we have about a 75% reassessment rate. So lots of organisations undertake the standard and actually keep to it. That is something they want to keep up. I think it's probably better that you let Graham give a bit more background about who the team were and where we're going to.
Certainly. Okay, John, listen, thank you very much for that. And if people have any other questions, they pop them in the chat there, we can come to them. And I'm sure John will be happy to deal with them. Just to introduce Graham Baker. Graham, again, Graham is he has been involved with Picasso, but he also has a background in many other standards. And he would have been involved in the design of the Picasso assessment model when it was launched in 2008. So it is a long career in standards. I'm sure Graham would be very anxious and delighted to hear what you have to tell us about how it moved forward. Thank you, Graham.
Lovely, thank you, Dermot. Yes, hello everybody, lovely to see you all. Yes, a long career in quality. I've been working with quality standards now for far too many years. Been involved with all of them, from the big ones to the little ones, ISO 9001 upwards or downwards. And as John said, we were working within Picasso and were slightly frustrated by where it was going and what it contained. So we went back to basics with IQ. Improving quality is exactly what it does, what it says on the tin. It's about improving the quality of what you do. The quality of what you do is based on the things you do and how you do them. And do you actually meet the needs of your users? So that was our starting point. What does a good quality organization look like? And then how can we simply describe this so that everybody can use it to assess themselves and be externally assessed? So IQ then is a set of good practice requirements. It's not the best, it's not the most brilliant in the world, it's what is good and will enable you to achieve your objectives. And it applies to all not-for-profit organizations. I'm hearing from the three later. We can deal with anybody from the tiniest organization with no employees up to the level of Respond, which has about 350 employees, I think, Nessa. It's a set of requirements that can apply to everybody when looked at intelligently that will help you improve what you do and how you do it. So at its basics, it covers obviously the legal requirements of what a good organization can look like. And then layered on top of that are the best practice requirements that have been developed over the years and that everybody knows what they are really. It's just that we never have the time to do them. And we're all too busy fighting and surviving to do the things that we should be doing. So this just sets out for you very simply what you should do. We devised it to have two levels, cunningly called a foundation level, which is the basics, the legal requirements of what everybody must do. And then on top of that, progression requirements that take you further, build you upwards and outwards and deeper, and take a more strategic approach to the way that you operate. So at the foundation level, this can apply to anybody. These are the things you really should do. And we said for each of these two levels, what we need to have is a means of dividing them up, slicing it up into easily digestible chunks. So the digestible chunks that we came up with, we called firstly accountable, which is the higher level stuff, mainly governance, good governance. You've got your governance code, you know what good governance looks like, you'll know what you should be doing. This just simply lays out good governance requirements at the strategic level for the board, and then how that links to the way that good governance is enabled and inputted at senior management level. So we're looking at leadership as well and senior management. So it's all the stuff at the top of the organization that says what are we really about and how to ensure it's well governed. Then going downwards, we look at the people in the organization and the volunteers, staff, volunteers, the people who actually carry out the jobs. How well are they recruited? How well are they developed? How well are they trained? How well are they supervised and appraised, looked after, encouraged, listened to, and treated well, and in a way that meets diversity requirements as well, of course. Then on top of that, looking outwards, how well do you work with other organizations? What you can call partnership working, but it doesn't have to be formal. Do you know who you should be working with? Do you work well with them? Do you understand their needs? They understand your needs? Do you actually produce more effective services because you work with others? And that we called welcoming. The third area we looked at was effectiveness. which is at the heart of what you're doing, of course. How effective are you means how well are you meeting the requirements you should be meeting. So to do this, you've got to plan. What is it we should be doing? Then how should we be doing it? Then are we actually delivering it? How well do we manage service delivery? Then once we've done it, do we know what we did in terms of monitoring? And the final crucial part of that jigsaw is evaluation. Not just knowing what you did and how you did it, but then using that knowledge to understand deeply what you did and improve what you did. There's a virtuous circle from planning what you do, doing what you plan, understanding what you did, improving what you do again. And the final element we came up with what we called sustainable, which picked up on elements including managing risk, which is absolutely vital, risk management at the board level, all the way down to service delivery. Do you understand your risks? Do you manage them well? Do you mitigate them and reduce them as far as possible? Obviously, money management, financial management, very tightly controlled in terms of legal requirements. But how well do you do this? Do you understand what you're spending, how you're spending it, why you're spending it, and do the board understand, most importantly, how effectively you're spending it? And then overall resources, what resources do you provide staff and volunteers to do their job? Are they adequate? They can never be enough, of course. But if you're setting out to do certain things, do you provide enough resources to do those things? And do you manage those resources well? And things like data protection, obviously, data management, and integrity of data. So those are the four key elements of what IQ is. Very briefly, how we use it, and the three speakers will be talking in depth about how they've used it. We encourage people to go for external assessment, which is what we do. We've got a lot of experience of doing this. And to do this, you first self-assess using a workbook. So for each of the requirements in the standard, you say, what are we doing? What evidence have we got? Do we need to improve it? Having convinced yourself you meet the requirements, you then have to convince us you meet the requirements. So we have an expert assessor appointed to you. They go through the documentation you provided. They carry out a virtual or on-site assessment, mostly virtual at the moment because of COVID. And then they come up with a report at the end of it that says, if you met the requirements of the standard, and we assume at this point you will, because all the work put into it. And on top of that, most importantly for us, is we identify what's excellent in your organization. We have a unique insight to you when we come in, and we feed that back to you and say, these are the really good things that we've found. And also on top of that then, well, these are the things you could do next to improve what you do. So we see it as a continuum of improving quality. And after this report will come suggestions for the next stage. So that's basically us and what we do and how we do it. I'll leave it to the three other speakers to provide you with some of their own practical experience. I must say, just finally, that we are passionate about what we do. We believe in the voluntary sector. We believe in improving quality. We believe that all organisations can be excellent. And we see our role in life is to help them become excellent. Thank you, Dermot.
Graham, I have one more thing to add to follow on from you. One of the things that we did through this process was we worked with Dermot to actually make some, I'm going to call them adjustments. They're not adjustments to what you're required to do, but there's some text adjustments to make the standard more appropriate for organisations in the Republic of Ireland. Moving certain words, so the version that Dermot has been using talks about Garda vetting as opposed to CRB, which is what we have in the UK. But the idea was that we would be prepared to have those discussions to make it work better for people in different areas, without making any change to what we're actually requiring organisations to produce. But if you like, making that localized version that people would understand better. Okay, thank you, Dermot.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Graham. So now we know what we're all talking about. I think the most important thing now is to hear what the experience of using it is. And I'm going to go first, but just before I do, I see a number of other people have joined us since we started. So for their benefit, I'm just telling them that this session is being recorded. If you put your name and your organization and an email contact details into the chat box, we will send you on a link to the recording afterwards. Now I'm delighted to welcome Peter Murphy. Peter is Chief Executive of Epilepsy Ireland, and they are currently accredited, having been accredited for 6 or 7 years at least with Picasso, that trusted charity. They're now accredited with IQ since I think last September. So Peter, you're very welcome. We'd love to hear you share the story with us. Thank you, Peter.
Hi, thanks, Dermot, and good morning, everybody. Thanks, Dermot, for the opportunity to, I suppose, highlight our own experience here in Epilepsy Ireland, and in particular this morning, I suppose, just on the I suppose the links or the synergy that exists between the IQ standard and the Charity Regulator Governance Code that we're all familiar with at this stage. If we just move that one on there, am I in control of that? No, I'm not. So just, I suppose, very briefly, first of all, Epilepsy Ireland is the national organisation that supports and represents people with epilepsy, their families, their carers. We're a relatively small organisation. We have 25 staff. We work within up to €2 million a year of a budget. Our vision is to achieve a society where no person's life is limited by epilepsy. So back in 2017, when we created our most recent strategic plan, although we have a new one on the way, we had 6 sort of broad headings within our plan. The first 4 you see there in red would have been the kind of the operational objectives in our organization, the things that you might expect to see in terms of support services, training and education, epilepsy awareness and advocacy, and supporting epilepsy research. And the bottom 2 were kind of enablers or facilitators of those 2. The 5th one there refers to, I suppose, the importance of funding and fundraising, both for short-term and longer-term needs. And then the 6th one, I've just pulled it out specifically there, was to, quote, to operate a stable, progressive organization, meeting all regulatory requirements and striving to implement best practice standards in the area of governance, organizational quality, human resources, and financial management. So kind of a broad enabler, if you like, of many of the other things that we wanted to do. And I suppose from the outset, I suppose there was 2 main reasons really for including governance and quality as one of the key strategic objectives. So as number 1, there had been at that stage a huge shift in public attitudes, to the voluntary sector compared to, say, a decade earlier. Donors and funders and the state and the general public were rightfully insistent that charities were run professionally and acted with accountability and transparency and delivered real impact. And then second of all, I suppose it had become blindingly obvious really that the goals that we might set for ourselves in other areas couldn't really be achieved unless there were solid foundations there to build from in terms of how we operated our organization from top to bottom. So I suppose that's our sort of background at Epilepsy Ireland in terms of governance and quality. And if we just move on there, I suppose there's a journey there that Dermot referred to that started actually back in 2011 when we began with our Picasso implementation, or now Trusted Charity, of course, as it's called. So over this sort of time period that's there on screen, there's been 2 kind of interlinked processes between governance and regulatory developments on one side, and then in our case, our quality journey on the right hand side. And when we started back in 2011, there was no regulator, there was no governance code as such. There wasn't even the voluntary governance code at that point. from what I can recall, that many charities operated under prior to the regulator coming on board much later, 2014. But I suppose at that stage, we knew that there was going to be changes in the regulatory environment coming, and implementing a quality standard like Picasso at the time seemed to be as good a way as any to prepare for what was coming, and to, I suppose, show to our stakeholders that we were serious about implementing good, or if possible, best practice. And to be honest, I suppose when we started back then, and again, Dermot would be familiar with this, we were, I suppose, a lot of the concepts that were in Picasso or in the whole area of quality were somewhat alien to us. Sometimes it seemed like there was a lot of overly bureaucratic, I suppose, steps involved, a lot of red tape or almost box ticking. I suppose that was our initial sort of viewpoint in here. I suppose the mindset was a lot different back then. And I suppose, in all honesty, it was a long and a fairly frustrating process. And as you can see, it took 4 years from 2011 to 2015 to get our Picasso level 1, which we then got again in 2018. And I suppose by 2018, the regulatory environment had changed a lot. The charity regulator was in place, the governance code was now in place. And then progressing up to more sort of current times, we saw the 2020 being the first year that charities had to comply with the new code, and then 2021 was the first year charities had to report on it. So hopefully now in 2022 we're all in the second year of our compliance and our reporting on the Charity Regulator Code. But just to go back to 2020, we were beginning to look ahead to recertifying with Picasso, our trusted charity. That had undergone a lot of changes since the last time we had been accredited with it. And around this time, I was introduced to the IQ system by Dermot and DFI. Initially, I suppose my default position was that we should stay with what we knew. I suppose it was only really on closer inspection, both by our own management team and by our quality and safety subcommittee of the board, that we, I suppose it became clear to us that IQ had, in our case, several advantages over what we were doing at the time. And chief among them really was a clear, fairly obvious synergy to the new upcoming governance code as it was at the time, which was on our horizon. It was clear that the things we were being asked to do or to document within the governance code were also appearing throughout the IQ standard. So, I mean, while Picasso had served as well, in all honesty, we weren't particularly familiar with the new standard that had come out. It seemed to be more complex. It was more prescriptive, somewhat repetitive, and probably less user-friendly, or at least that was our interpretation of it. We thought IQ covered the same areas of quality, but it seemed a bit simpler. And as I said, it was more aligned with the Irish regulatory environment. So our board aimed for accreditation in 2021, and we were delighted to be awarded that mark, the foundation mark, in September of last year. Now, last summer was a particularly interesting time, I suppose you want to call it that, because not only were we working through the IQ indicators, we were also completing our first governance code compliance forum, and we were selected by the HSE for one of their internal audits at the same time. So that was quite daunting. But the good news, I suppose, was that working through the IQ pack, we were able to update many of the elements needed by the governance code and resolve the odd gap that existed. I suppose it also meant that we were well prepared for the demands of the HSE audit, and the volumes of documents that were requested by them as part of that. So we were essentially killing 2 or even 3 birds with one stone by, working through initially IQ and then using that to build our governance code on. I suppose before that, despite the fact that there's very much an intertwined timeline there, and even though it might seem illogical, quality and governance had, I suppose, in our mindset, been often viewed as separate, pieces of work, and there was a lot of duplication as a result. So I suppose what in 2020, 2021, I suppose we found a new way of making them work together. So we just move on there. And I suppose when I say that the IQ framework aligns with the governance code, so what does that mean? I suppose just here on the screen are just a couple of similarities or a couple of comparisons of some of the key features of both. So again, it's just kind of it's just my own selection, if you like. There are several similarities there in terms of how evidence is collected and documented and self-assessed. There's also aspects of proportionality that are common in both, with two levels within both the code and within IQ. And if you look at the 6 principles of the code in the bottom left and the 4 elements of the IQ standard, it's also clear that there's a lot of overlap. I suppose in terms of differences between the two, I'd say IQ probably takes a deeper look at the services and activities that the charity provides. And of course, there's also no requirement at the moment anyway to provide any evidence directly to the charity regulator about the code. And as Graham has said, obviously, if you want to be assessed by IQ externally, then you obviously need to submit all of your evidence. So I suppose those would be the two obvious sort of differences. But in general, as we'll just see now, if we move on, just to look a little bit deeper at a couple of examples, there is a significant overlap and a significant synergy between them. So this slide is developed from a piece of work, I think, originally done by Dermot at the EFI, which mapped some of the elements of IQ onto the governance code requirements. On the left is the governance code requirements for principle 1, which is advancing charitable purpose. And on the right in green is the corresponding indicator, if you like, from the IQ standard. I mean, this is just principle 1 of the code, and as you can see, there's of the eight requirements there, 7 of them were directly comparable within the IQ standard, and 5 of those are within the foundation level. So some of them are, again, not going to go through them, but some of them are very similar, almost identical. Well, there are some subtle differences, I suppose, in some of the other comparisons. So, for example, number 3 there, the IQ indicator refers to service user needs when developing annual plans. That's not something that you'll see directly within the governance code. But in general, I think there's 49 principles within the governance code. And if I recall, there was something like 45, 46 of them that also appear in some shape or form within IQ. So we just move on. So just, again, just picked literally a couple of examples here. Given the synergies, obviously, I suppose that means that one can be used to support the attainment of the other. So when it comes to, I suppose, ensuring that you have the evidence to support your good practice when you're collecting evidence and documenting it for one of these standards, whether it's the code or whether it's IQ, you're also collecting for the other. So if you undertake IQ, you will either intentionally or unintentionally also be ensuring your compliance with the governance code, or vice versa. So these are just a couple of examples here that were on the previous screen, and the types of evidence then are just highlighted there that one might use to support your compliance. So 1.1 in the governance code is to be clear about the purpose of your charity, to be able to explain it in simple terms. IQ similarly says the vision, purpose, and values of the organization are clearly identified. So when it comes to how do you prove that, well, your constitution, your strategic plan, your annual plans, annual report, your own website and promotional materials. These are all sources of evidence that can be used to, I suppose, to show your compliance with both of those indicators. And then 1.3 talks about in the governance code having an achievable plan for at least the next year ahead. Similarly, IQ refers to an annual plan that's based on the needs of users and sets out the service that will be delivered, etc. So again, quite similar. So how do you show that? Well, again, you might have an operational plan and a budget, or you might have minutes approving that from your board meeting. And in the case of IQ, maybe you'll have something like consultation with members or service users, needs analysis or surveys, things like that. And again, those, if you're collecting for one, as you can see, if you're collecting data for the governance code, you're also meeting IQ and vice versa. And then final, I think it's the final slide, just a couple more examples. I probably don't even have to go through them because it's literally, there were just a couple of more examples. If we can move it on. Maybe not. So the last screen was really just, oh, there we go. Again, not really going to go through, but you can just, see there quickly that having resources is, making sure that your charity has the resources is mentioned in the governance code. And again, there was 2 similar indicators within IQ where the board is considering the resources that are needed and specifically that there's a fundraising plan. So again, if you're looking to meet one, there's a list there of some of the things that you might look to provide as evidence, and you are a multi-year budgets, a reserves policy, infrastructure plans, or at the moment things like remote working assessments and so on. And then the final example, again, very similar. The governance code talks about reviewing what you're doing and making sure you're acting within your charity's remit. And again, IQ speaks about the governing document being fit for purpose. So again, you might have evidence that your board or subcommittee or your AGM has looked at the constitution, or you've taken legal advice or so on. And again, that's the kind of evidence that will meet either and both of those. So again, look, these are just some examples. I suppose what I would say is that this is replicated in our experience throughout. I've only used a couple of sections. Obviously, there's a lot in both the code and in IQ. So I suppose I'm really just trying to highlight that no matter what section you pick, you will find these types of overlaps and synergies. And final slide for sure is, just a couple of conclusions, I suppose. Look, there's plenty of reasons why our organizations might want to attain and recognize quality standards such as IQ. The benefit I was asked to focus on this morning was the synergy between IQ and the governance code, which we all have to do. And I suppose my takeaway messages would be, number one, there's a considerable synergy. Number two, individually, both IQ and the code will require a significant commitment from everybody, from your board, management, staff, volunteers. Number three, compliance with either one makes compliance with the other easier and less time consuming. And I suppose they can be undertaken as one work package quite easily to avoid duplication. And then in terms of opportunities, you can use IQ to help attain or strengthen governance code compliance. If you successfully implement IQ, you'll be very close to the governance code. Or you can use the existing or your existing governance code compliance, if you're already compliant, to attain something like IQ and then reinforce your stakeholders' confidence in your organization by an independent accreditation. And again, you'll already be most of the way there. So I suppose bottom line, opportunity here to, as you can see in the right, kill 2 birds with the one stone. No offense to any birds that are present. So I'll leave it at that, Dermot. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was very good, Peter. I think you gave us a great insight, and you really demonstrated to us much better than was done in the original document. You brought it to life very much, and thank you for that. Again, just to remind people, if there's any questions you'd like to put to Peter, pop them into the chat, and Kelly, who's managing the behind the scenes there for us, she'll certainly bring it to her attention, and we'll come back to them. I'm just going to move on, and our next presentation this morning is coming from Nessa Aylmer. She's Head of Compliance at Respond Housing Association. Nessa has just recently, and her organization, gone through the assessment, and they're waiting. I think the jury is still out. Maybe you know more than we did the last time we spoke, Nessa.
Thanks a million, Dermot, and thanks everyone for coming today. I'll just share my screen. I think our Kelly, you're going to do it. Yeah, great. So I'll show you a video at the end if it works, because sometimes there's a lot of technical hitches with these kind of things. But just to give you a bit of background, Dermot has kindly asked me to speak, and I was delighted to do so because we're very much so at the end of the implementation process of improving quality. And like Peter, you know, it's when you start out, like we started out in 2018, and I'll show you the launch of that video at the very end. But just to give you a bit of background on me, first of all, I'm head of compliance. I came to Respond, I was recruited in 2020, May 2020. So I joined the quality implementation process of, it was Picasso Trusted Charity in 2020. So I took over the reins of that from, you know, the head of compliance who was on maternity leave at the time. So I suppose, you know, it was, my background, just to give you a bit of my background, it's not like quality and risk management and practice management are also part of my background. I am a solicitor by profession as well. But during the recession years, I did take time out and work with a company called Outsource Finance. We developed a few standards for the legal sector. So it wasn't within the charitable sector. So it's quite different, but the process is very much so the same. So I was the assessor, I was the risk management, quality management auditor. So I went into all the legal firms and they could be, you know, big, small, just very much so like the charitable sector. So there's a lot of similarities there. And, you know, and that gave me a really good background into what best practice or good practice is. So then when I joined Respond, I was delighted to take it on at the time as National Compliance Manager, because what we do is we have 4 programs, and quality assurance is one of them within the compliance department. So there's also compliance, risk management, and data protection. So there are 4 main programs that I have. So I have performance, you know, key performance indicators that mean that you know, one of them is to achieve a quality accreditation. So I'm delighted now to be very much so at the very end of it, but we're happy, we're doing the foundation stage, and we're happy to progress on, because as Graham says, it's improving quality, it's a journey, there's always room for improvement, and not to just stand still. And you know, we're very much so a learning organization within Respond. So just we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you a bit of background on what Respond, our vision, mission and values, that every family and individual in Ireland will have high quality housing as part of a vibrant and caring community. Just the next slide there. So if we're not for profit, we're one of the biggest approving housing bodies in the country. We cover 26 out of 27 counties in Ireland in terms of the services that we offer. There's 342 staff currently at the moment. We've had a huge recruitment drive in the last 2 years. So we're not for profit, huge social purpose, to provide for people's housing needs by working in close cooperation with the government, local authorities and relevant agencies. And that would be the Housing Agency and now the Approved Housing Body Regulatory Authority, which was set up, put on a statutory footing, replacing the voluntary code in 2019. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I'll just give you a bit of background on the services we offer. Like we have, you know, a portfolio of about 6,000 properties, and we deliver social housing, and we've also been part of the first cost rental initiative in Ireland in Enniskerry Road, and I have a picture of that development at the end of the presentation. It's fantastic. That was recently opened and launched by the Minister. We also have 6 homeless hubs, you know, buildings within Dublin and Limerick. We operate those. We also operate 17 childcare services around the country, 4 daycare. We provide a lot of family support services, and we've 4 resettlement services in relation to Syrian refugees. And I'm sure that'll probably increase now with the Ukrainian crisis that's happening at the moment. So you will see that the business lines we operate was very commercial orientated in terms of the developments that we deliver with contractors, builder contractors. We have a huge development department within Respond internally as well, with a cross section of, architects, engineers, surveyors. clerk of works, like, you know, it's a very big department. And we've a huge ambition within our strategic plan now, which is currently it's at the end of its interim review. We're aiming to build 4,500 properties within the next, 2 years or 3 years. So you can see that we are heavily regulated as well, in terms of, the requirements that we need. The new improved housing body regulatory standards have come on board, the guidance is due to issue on them. And, doing this quality accreditation process, there is so much overlap as well as what Peter was talking about with the Charities Governance Code. So I was actually preparing for them in parallel. It was the first time for the compliance form to be documented to comply with the Charities Governance Code. So it actually made it quite easy, because in terms of the overlap that you've seen that Peter has explained about. So it's been definitely very eventful and very busy within the compliance department to respond in the last 6 months. If you move on to the next slide. So I want to discuss, this is just one of our childcare managers in with the kids in one of our childcare centres. So it's just, if you move on, the next slide. That's just a little testimonial about from one of our services users. Obviously, we love the playground because English is not her first language. Our daughter is able to learn and improve her social skills as well as their language skills. So what we do in our developments is we try and, have a lot of services, support services there for, a range of ages, and that includes children as well, So if we move on to the next slide, and that's one of our playgrounds. And that's one of our development managers as well, in terms of, there's so many activities, and that's the Enniskerry Road development. It's just smashing. It's absolutely fantastic. We're all delighted with it. That was done in partnership with Two Housing. So down to the really interesting stuff. The improving quality standard. Why did we want to do it? So basically, we wanted to achieve consistency in our services and standards to all our tenants and service users across the country. We're in 27 counties, as I explained, and we don't want any service to be of a substandard or to be less than the service offered in, say, in Dublin. We want it to be the same down in Cork. We want it to be the same up in Galway. Another reason, and this is really important, it's independent external validation and assurance to our board, to all our other external stakeholders, in terms of our regulators, in terms of our partners. I think it's very good. It's very good reputational value to have that Q standard. It'll be on our letterhead, it'll be on our annual report. And it just means that, external, internal stakeholders know that they're dealing with a reputable organisation that's well run, well managed and governed, and looked after, puts service users and tenants at the heart of what we do. So IQ is recognised, and this is something that we're aware. It's a key quality framework for the voluntary charitable sector in the Republic of Ireland and in the UK. And, when I came on board, we were embarking on the trusted charity, and I'll go through the process of how we did that in a few minutes. But I was also given the improvement quality booklet at the time, and I was kind of looking at that. And even though we were heavily involved in all the dissecting all the standards of the trusted charity, I always kind of looked at it and thought, this is actually it kind of has the same level of detail, but it's more it's I don't know, it's just more easier to follow and manageable, I think. So I was always had my eye on it. And so not that I was delighted, when Trusted Charity was wound down, and we had literally finished all the work, all our workshops. And, it was something that we didn't want, we straight away, it was like, I'd love to suggest to the board that we, apply for the improving quality accreditation. So just in the next point there, just respond is fully supportive, and the board were fully supported, and at every board meeting, and I would also take part in Finance, Risk and Audit Committee meetings, which we have 6 to 8 times a year. So part of the agenda items would be updating them on, on how we're getting on in the accreditation implementation process. So if we go on to the next slide. So how we started out was, we had a Picasso Trusted Charity. We had the workbook and manual like everyone would have been given. It's extremely comprehensive. And what we did, now I didn't do it, the head of compliance at the time, we would set up terms of reference. We appointed trusted charity champions, which were nominated from each department. It was very important that we had a cross-departmental collaborative approach to this. It doesn't work in isolation if it's just me. You know, the compliance department with heads of departments working on it. Like, I would have asked every trusted charity champion at each workshop beforehand to, take this to your team, discuss it at your team meetings. If they were the relevant department that needed to report back at the workshop, and they would have been given the, the trusted charity or the IQ requirements or the indicators in advance, and they would have looked at them in detail, discussed them with their team, and then the trusted charity champion would meet every 6 weeks and would attend that meeting. And I'll show you just an example of the workbook, but we launched the HYPE with the Trusted Charity standard in 2018. And another way of kind of promoting the quality initiative across the company was that all staff were invited to this. And there was a lot of workshops that went on during the day. And hopefully the video will work, you'll see what they did, the great work they did. So it was just trying to communicate and educate everyone on the importance of this, and that we need it from the bottom up, from the top down, across all departments, and everyone needs to get involved and to get on board. So yeah, the workshops were held every 6 weeks, and there were none, maybe in August, if there was a holiday month, it would have been moved on to September, but they were literally gone through, and they lasted about an hour and a half. And there was a lot of preparatory work in advance by the people who would, by the department, say governance, or if it was financial planning or something like that, finance department would have been involved in that as well. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is an example of, now this is, now you probably can't really see it there, but what we did was we just got the Excel spreadsheet, the old reliable Excel spreadsheet, and we looked at the 11 trusted charity standards at the time, and we listed out the indicators. We also put comments. You see little red little triangles in each in the indicator cells there. So they gave an explanation of what was required, what documentary evidence is needed to verify that you are actually complying with all the indicators in the standard. So it was quite grueling, I'm sure. It was time consuming, but we did get great support from every department. And so we traffic lighted. So basically, if there was something that we didn't have done, or that we were just starting or progressing well or finished, all the purple was complete, but there were areas in that now, and it was a huge spreadsheet. You can see all the various worksheets at the bottom. So, it was very comprehensive, and it gave us a kind of a way of monitoring what was in place. So at different points in time, we'd go back to the spreadsheet and go back to each department and say, how is this progressing? Will we have it done by X date, and different things like that. So this was kind of a planning document. So if you move on to the next slide, then, we found out at the beginning of 2021 that the trusted charity marks would be expanded. This was a huge shock. We had to go back to our board. We were on board with improving quality, but we didn't want any of the work that was done. All the workshops were completed over an 18-month period, and we didn't want anything. We didn't want all the valuable work to go to waste, and we were still very much focused on achieving the quality accreditation standard. So with Dermot's fantastic and valuable mentorship, we approached, Dermot was involved as well with all the workshops with us, which really helped us considerably along the way, because this was my first charitable accreditation standard, and we really needed that. We then looked at the foundation workbook, and we found that we could actually map a lot of what we had done to the various requirements, because there are 4 elements, but there are maybe 4, 6, 4, 7 requirements, and we were able to kind of just map them to the trusted charity. So what we did was we just literally bit by bit, we went through it, we went through the spreadsheet, the previous spreadsheet that I just showed you, and we were able to fill out the compliance form very easily. And if we didn't have something done, say in that column, the fourth column, the empty column there, if we didn't have something, we could earmark it in red and know that these are things that we need to work on. And there are gaps, and but at least they're also part of the required. They would be within our work in progress anyway at the moment, you know. So if we can move on to the next. So what we did was then, once we had the workbook filled out, we would have brought that to our executive management team, which I'm part of, and we also would have brought it to the FRAC committee and the board. And so it was very heavily scrutinised, we then were able to, once everyone was approved, board approved, we knew we were in a position to apply for the audit. So we started that in last January. And what we did was we kind of segregated with Dermot's advice, we segregated, on the network. We listed the elements: accountable, welcoming, effective, sustainable. And we also would have needed employees' consent, because we would need to send a list of employees' email details and contact details to the assessor. So that's something that was very important from a GDPR perspective. So just to flag that, if it's not within your fair notice on your website or anything like that, we would have needed employees' consent. So we would have we looked at that as well. So all these little things that you needed to do, there was a lot to do to prep, to get ready for the audit, for the desktop part of the audit, the desktop and physical audit. And I'll explain about the physical audit in a minute. So what we did then, we would have subdivided, had subfolders with all the F1, they're all the requirements, and we would have populated all the folders with the help of every department, because a lot of the documents would have been updated. There would have been more, that would have completed by the time we applied for this. So we were able to collate all that information in the one spot, and it was reviewed by each head of department and trusted charity champion as well, which we call them IQ champions now. So if we move on to the next slide, the physical audits. Then once the desktop audit took place, we sent, what we did was we had everything on the network, and we sent permissions to the assessor, which was Graham, in IQ, to access the folder in a secure environment, because there would have been a lot of, well, not commercially sensitive, but it's confidential data. So it was very, we had to make sure that what we were giving access, that the permissions and the security standards were in place for that, and that it wasn't available for everyone to look at. So then we would have got, Graham would have, the assessor would have contacted us and said, right, we should start maybe looking at organising physical audits, which took place over Teams. And that took place over on the 24th and 25th of May, so it's quite recent. So what the purpose of the audit is, of the interviews and the physical audit, it's for the assessor to validate how well things are working and get a feel for the organisation, its culture, and meet staff in a real working atmosphere. So then what we did was we chose, with Graham's advice, a sample of interviewees who were selected spanning up, down and across the organisation. So he would have met a childcare manager, he would have met a board member, he would have met a line man, a deputy head of a department, or a manager within a department. And so we got a good, cross-sectional representative panel for interviews, which was fantastic. And each and every department was represented, as well as the board and executive management team as well. So if we move on to the next, that's it. So I'm just wondering if I can try and share the launch. It's a nice little video. It's only 1.4 minutes. I'll see, can I do that? Because I'd love you to see the launch, and you can see the synergy that that was shared with everyone at the time. Now there could be an issue with, you see that?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Sound might be. Might just take a bit of time. Fine. Oh, here. Can you hear that?
No.
No, darn. Just but I suppose it's just pictures really, but it's a picture, yeah, no. Just see. There's Dermot. Looking great, Dermot. Yeah, sorry about the sound there. There is a way to do it. I found that out yesterday on Teams, but it just showed you, it gave you kind of a good feel for the day that happened. Everyone looked really happy, and there was a lot of, it was just a good way for everyone to understand what the standard was about. So I hope I didn't go on too long, Dermot.
Not at all. No, that was really good. And yeah, pity the video didn't work, but I captured everything very well before that. But I know the picture, sometimes in that few minutes, you just get a whole sense of what happened. But I think you've been quite comprehensive. Thank you very much, Nessa.
No problem.
Again, anyone with any questions, as I say, pop them in the chat. We'll come back to them. And I'm just going to move on now. And I'm going to bring in Wendy Mccarry. She's Chief Executive of Bluestack Foundation for people with special needs. Wendy, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Great, Wendy. Delighted that you're here. So, Wendy, your experience, you haven't had your assessment yet. You're a work in progress. Are you reaping benefits or are you worn out? Maybe I expect a bit of both.
Definitely a bit of both, yeah. Can I get my presentation up there maybe?
I'll get that for you now. Sorry, pardon me.
I suppose just to say that for us, we are the complete other end of the spectrum from the previous two speakers, and well done to them. We are a tiny organization. We would have started from very humble beginnings. We certainly wouldn't have the level of expertise and professionalism that has been shown in the previous organizations. But what I hope we will show is, as Graham and John has said, is how applicable this program is, regardless of the size of the organization, regardless of the resources within the organization. Yes, it is a lot of work, but there is so much learning from it. There are so many benefits from it, regardless of the type of organization you are, or the size of resources that you have at your disposal. So we were essentially a group of parents of children and adults with disabilities. If we could move on there, we were essentially a group of parents. So that's how we kind of came together and got started, and I will go through that in a minute with you. But for me, it's really important that we kind of tell our story a little bit before I go into kind of the benefits of the improving quality. standard, because I think it gives a real insight into, you know, the types of organizations and the different types of organizations that this you know, improving quality standard can actually apply to. So like Dermot has said, my name is Wendy and I'm the CEO here in the Bluestacks. But more importantly, I'm the mother of 5 children, one of whom is beautiful little Ava. You see a picture of her there. And Ava has cerebral palsy, epilepsy, intellectual disability, delayed swallow, cortical vision impairment, scoliosis, lazy bowel syndrome. The list just goes on and on and on. And I suppose, like so many other parents and so many other families, she is our absolute world. And everything all of us do is really with her at the forefront and the motivator, I suppose, for everything that we do here in the Bluestack Special Needs Foundation. And it will be the same of every other parent who's involved or every other carer who's involved here. So that really is the core of what we are about. If we could move on. So we actually started in 2002, quite a long time ago. We just had our 20th anniversary, and it was again another local family here in Donegal who had a child with additional needs, and I suppose quickly realised how difficult it is to access the kind of supports and services that you need when you have a child with additional needs. So the dad, for his 40th birthday, decided that rather than have a birthday party, which we kind of all were doing at the time, we had plenty of money in those days, not like today. But rather than have a 40th birthday, he would try and get 40 friends to walk 40 kilometres and raise 40,000 for people with additional needs. And that was the start of what we call the Bluestack Challenge. So we do that Bluestack Challenge every 2 years. And to date, we have raised over 1.6 million euro. And that essentially, I suppose, between 2002 and 2006, we did the walk. We raised the money, we put out a call for applications, and we dispersed the funds. And that was really what we were about. So we would have given funds to local community groups, to families, to parents, but we were really just a foundation dispersing the funds. And then in 2006, I suppose what we realized was, despite the fact that we had raised so much money, you know, there really wasn't any impact or change being seen in terms of service provision for families, particularly around the areas of early intervention, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, psychology, assessments, like that. And this is 20 years ago, that really wasn't changing. So in 2006, we decided to set up a charity. And again, it was a group of parents and a couple of people who'd worked in the sector. And we decided to go for charitable status. And we set up in 2006. And one of the first things we did was we employed a speech and language therapist who would have worked 2 days here in Donegal town with us, 2 days in Letterkenny, and 2 days up in, 1 day up in Buncrana a week. And we offered low cost speech and language therapy. And the second thing that we did was we set up a research study with the HSE, and we went right across the county to try and find out what people want, what people need. And I suppose one of the things that came back, what we learned, people said, was that they needed a place. You know, so from the moment that they get the news that there is, you know, maybe a developmental delay, or there is a neurological issue, or there is a medical issue, that they needed a place to go where they could find out information, that they needed a place, you know, where they could go with their children that was non-judgmental. It was a non-judgmental space, and it wasn't just about inclusion or, you know, acceptance, but it was about celebration. It was about really seeing people's abilities and really looking at the capacity and the capabilities of the young people that we work with. And I suppose one of the other things that we realized, and I certainly realized this was that, you know, we learn more from each other than we do from professionals. And that's no disrespect to professionals, but I know certainly as a parent, in terms of problem solving, I've definitely learned an awful lot more from other parents who've been through similar circumstances than I have from professionals. So we were looking at, okay, how do we create those opportunities to be the catalyst to bring parents together so that they can get that learning from each other. And I suppose the other thing that we learned was that, you know, people really needed support, and more so when they have a child with additional needs, and not just disability specific support, you know, the medical model, but that they really needed family support. They're still a family after all. And I thought that was really, you know, that was big learning for us as well. So if we can move on. Okay. So in terms of, so like I said, we would have started very, very small, very tiny organization. You know, when we first started, we had one part-time CE worker, and we would have had 2 TUS workers who would have done maintenance. So we were a very small organization. We had raised a considerable amount of money, and one of the first things we did in 2008 after completing the research study was that we purchased a building here in Donegal, because people had said they wanted a place, they wanted an identifiable place to go. So we purchased a building here, purchased it early 2008 before the crash, at the height of the boom. We paid an awful lot of money for it. We had secured European funding that fell through when the crash came. So we ended up with a massive mortgage. So between 2008 and 2016, it was very tough for us as an organization. We remained very small. We utilized our building to try and do room hire and things like that to try and cover the mortgage and try and keep the place afloat and going. But then again, in 2016, things started to kind of improve, and I suppose our service offerings began to grow hugely. So we started the journey with Dermot in 2018. Our organization was beginning to grow. And I suppose we realized as an organization that this growth really needed to be managed professionally, despite very little resources that we had at our disposal. So all we had essentially was the money that we were raising every 2 years through the Bluestack Challenge. But in 2018, we had received our first HSE Section 39, which was for 36,000. So we were a tiny organization, like I say, and up until this, our funds, like I say, were raised through the Bluestack Challenge. And at the outset, I suppose we realized that, you know, we were essentially, when we first looked at the Improving Quality program, we were terrified, you know, but then Dermot kind of sat down, he went through everything with us, and we were looking at the time commitment that was going to be involved, knowing that we didn't have a huge, you know, staff baseline to be able to work on this. But he went through it really slowly with us. And at the outside, I suppose the one thing that gave us confidence was that most of the stuff that it was suggesting you should do, we were kind of doing, but we didn't actually have it in a formal structure, a formal system in place where we could gather, track, record, and retrieve information. So that was huge for us. If we can move on, please. And I suppose we had a lot of discussion, you know, around whether we could take this on or not, you know, or whether we'd have the capability to even do it, given the fact that we were trying to grow the business at the same time. But there were a couple of things happening within the environment that kind of made us think, okay, we really need to look at this. One, that, you know, we live in a litigious society, so we needed to make sure that our T's were crossed and our I's were dotted. I suppose at the time we were beginning to see huge numbers of high profile cases of reputational damage within the charity sector, and that was having an impact on all charities within the sector. I suppose we were realizing that social media and the information platform that it provides, you know, that through that negative publicity can really spread very quickly. And I suppose as a small organization in a small community, in a small town, you know, our reputation was all we had. You know, if people didn't trust us, then we weren't going to survive. There was going to be no sustainability. I suppose at the same time, you know, the whole issue of governance was becoming a lot more prominent. We were aware that the charity compliance was coming down the road, and that would be a requirement for us and therefore a necessity. But I suppose the most important thing was, from the board's perspective, there was a real appetite to ensure that we had transparency, accountability, and that the board members had real confidence, you know, when they met people in the town and they said they were a board member of the organization, that they were in a position to really kind of stand behind what we were doing and know that, you know, what we were doing it from a good place and with the proper procedures in place. If we can move on. So it's just something light-hearted here, but it said, a body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody. And I suppose we realise, like I say, that we will not survive if we're not trusted. If I can move on again. So what the Improving Quality mechanism did for us, we spent the bulk of 2019 putting our systems and procedures in place. We worked very closely with Dermot and hugely indebted to him for the support and the patience that he had with us. Like I say, is a really small organisation. But when 2020 arrived and COVID, as an organisation, we actually made the decision to stay open and offer emergency respite. So we had so many of our families, particularly families who had children with behaviours of concern or high complex medical needs, that, you know, everything had shut down. We had families going into breakdown where they just simply couldn't cope. So we decided to stay open throughout with visors and masks and hairnets and gowns and all kinds of PPE. But we stayed open and we did emergency respite. So families were able to drop their children into us, and we would keep them for a couple of hours just to give the families a bit of break. And that really started to draw the attention of TUSLA, PUBL and the HSE. And our organisation kind of expanded really, really quickly. Kind of overnight, we went from having 5 staff to what we have now, which is 40 staff. So we kind of now, a lot of them are, 19 of them are part-time. But we got very big very quickly, and we went from having 1 location here in Donegal town to having a second location up in Falcarra. Donegal, as you probably know, is quite a large area. And we have 2 new locations as well, one in Letterkenny and one in Killy-Gordon. So we kind of expanded really, really quickly. And, you know, that was quite intimidating. If we can move on. So what improving quality gave us? It gave us that foundation to grow. So we knew that the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted, and we kind of had the foundation to be able to lead out on that growth, you know, and know that when we were getting this attention from the HSE, and we subsequently got a lot of funding from the HSE, TUSLA and PUBL, that at least we were able to meet their criteria, and we were able to tick the boxes for them in terms of when they were looking for reports, when they were looking for documentation, when they were looking for evidence, when they were looking for governance. We had an awful lot of that done through the Improving Quality programme. So it also gave us the capacity to ensure there was a consistent quality offering of service across the sites. And that was really important. You know, I suppose we all talk in here about the ethos of the organisation and you know, how we evaluate, and we always say, well, just look at the child's face and you know exactly whether you're doing a good job or whether you're not doing a good job. If they want to come in and they don't want to go home, then you're in a good place. And you know, and we had this kind of ethos, and we were saying, well, like how do we replicate that in another centre where they're not familiar with that ethos, you know, and how do you document it so that you can communicate in a way that people don't have to live it, but that they can read it and then understand it and be able to replicate it. So I suppose, like I say, it gave us the capacity to ensure there was a consistent quality offering of service across sites, that the staff, the board, the volunteers, because we have about 90 volunteers that work with us here, and we wouldn't survive without them, that stakeholders and member families were all singing from the same hymn sheet. And I say member families because we work for our members. We don't use the terminology of service users, we use the terminology of members. They are members here, they own the organisation, the families own the organisation, and we very much work for them. So that the ethos of the Bluestack Foundation remained at the forefront, as it was now well articulated and documented. So these are the kind of benefits that we saw from the improving quality experience that we had. And sustainability was really important for us. We had a real sense, you know, because we were such a small organisation, all the information was held by a couple of personalities, be it board members or be it myself or be it, you know, other family members that were in here. All the information was held by personalities. And, you know, we were always saying, God, if something happens to them, you know, where is the documented evidence? Where is the actual information that we would need to ensure the organisation is sustainable beyond any personalities? So this really gave us that capacity to make sure that, you know, we had a transferable system of operation. And it gave us a framework to create the model for Bluestack Foundation, which is something we worked with Sligo IT and Letterkenny Institute of Technology as well to write a model of what the Bluestack is, because the whole idea is that it can be taken as a model and it can be replicated in different areas. And it gave us the capacity to meet the compliance and government requirements for funders, and the preparation for the Charities Governance Code. So we learned an awful lot out of it. Even as a really small organisation, we got so much out of it. So if we could move on there, please. And what made it work for us was the most important thing, and I know the previous speakers who've been on have said this, it was really about, you know, buy-in from the stakeholders. Nessa explained how, you know, she had the workshops, went through the organisation, made sure people were involved, had champions of it. Now, we didn't have that level of size, but we thought it was really important that everybody in the organisation, from volunteers to you know, the board of trustees to staff members that we did have, that they were familiar with it and they were you know, excited and motivated to try and implement this and to gather the necessary information. And we had to have ownership, like I say, from and an appetite from the board to really do this. And I think the difference there is that appetite piece, like why we knew as an organisation that this was going to be really necessary. Like I said earlier, you know, it was also a want. The board really wanted to be proud and be able to confidently stand behind the operational policies and procedures of the organisation. And I think what also made it work for us was that it was a systematic, methodical, step-by-step approach, and we worked slowly through it with Dermot. And again, I just can't thank Dermot enough for his support, his patience, you know, even just like we would read things sometimes that we had to do and we would think, oh, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to get evidence? And Dermot always had explanations. He always had examples that we could take from and utilize. And, you know, eventually then he was saying, oh yeah, we do that, or, you know, and he would identify for us how we would actually gather that information, which was really very, very helpful. So if we could move on there, please. So I think what really struck us was that, you know, when we saw it first, we were like, oh my God, this is too much. We'll never be able to manage it. We're such a small organization. We don't have the resources to take something like this on. But as we worked through it, it didn't actually overwhelm us, you know, and it became very much like, you know, when an elephant take one bite at a time, and that's, it was step by step, and that's exactly what we did. So if we could move on there. So in terms of our organisation, I'll just kind of show you where we've come to. We have 374 families registered with us. We work with families who have a disability, be it physical, sensory, intellectual or mental health, regardless of whether it's mild, moderate or profound. And we also work with families pre and post diagnosis. But again, we're not really interested in people's labels. We respond to their express needs, and that's really important. If we could move on there again. So I just want to kind of show you the kind of structure of the organisation now. So we have our board of trustees. We have 4 essential programs that we offer. So we have outreach, where we go out into families and we provide respite. So we have 19 staff out in the county who do that, and we have a manager of that area. We also then have internal clubs and programs. So we do everything from Saturday clubs, art school programs. We do a teen club, we have a choir, we just sang in Ablefest. We had 33 members down in Ablefest there at the weekend. So we have a whole range. We have a garden therapy group, we have parent support network, we have a whole range of different program offerings that we have. And we have a community services program. So we have a cafe now out the back that's run by young adults with intellectual disabilities. And that's all around kind of income generation. I suppose if there was anything that COVID taught us, it was that we can't be reliant on the bucket, that we need to be looking at social enterprises, and we need to look at income generation activities just to try and ensure the sustainability of our organisation. And we also now have a training and progression program, which is really working with 16 young adults with disability. And they, I suppose, we were deeply conscious of, you know, the fact that we're 20 years old now at this stage, and an awful lot of the children that we would have worked with, you know, have come through our organisation, and when they turn 18, it's really a cliff edge. So we were trying to find something that we could do with them that would, you know, enable them to progress into employment, education, or enterprise, of going to start their own business. So we're working with 16 young adults now, and they're having a great time. I think they're doing drama today downstairs. So and that's a really lovely program. It's really lovely. So this kind of gives you a feel of the organisation. Like I say, we grew really quickly over a very small number of years. But what I really want to try and communicate is that even for an organisation as small as us, trying, you know, to professionalise our service offering and professionalise, you know, our practice, it was a really helpful opportunity. So again, thank you to Dermot, and thank you to everybody. I think that's the last slide, if you just want to move on there. Yeah, so I mean, our dream, we want to continue to grow, and our dream is that we'd have a Bluestack Foundation in every county. So who knows where we go from here. And final slide there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that, Wendy. And you're overdoing the kind remarks there, but anyway, we'll take them. Thank you. Thanks again. Yeah, I think even just listening to what you said is it's the breadth of the improving quality standard. Is that its set of requirements are so focused and so comprehensive, and yet so, in one sense, constrained, that they're relevant to every organization, regardless of size or complexity. So, no, well done on all your work, and your growth is phenomenal. But the fact that you've managed it all, your board and yourself and the team you lead, you have an awful lot of the credit to take for that. And the fact, the brave decisions that you made early days in the pandemic, are you couldn't think highly enough of them, and the way you and your whole team we're anxious to be involved and part of that. So thanks again, Wendy. Listen, we're going to throw it open to the floor now. I just saw, well, one question that I did notice came in, I think Tamara, I think it was you sent it in there, and you were asking about, does the assessor pick those who'll be interviewed? Well, yes, generally speaking, that's what happened. One of the functions of the assessor, when you get all the information in, you will already have supplied them with a list of all your staff, volunteers, and board members. They know where they work, what roles they perform, and they know the days, how long they've been working or on the board or a volunteer in the organization. So from that point of view, yes, they'd be looking to get a cross-section feel of your organization, and they would pick it. But IQ is not a dictatorial type of approach. As we say, we point out the things that we find that you're excellent at, and highlight them so that you're actually aware of your strengths in that area. But if it's certainly more conversational, so that list is sent back to you, it'll be part of a conversation, which in fact the whole assessment process is.
Can I just add to that, Dermot? Yes, you're right. But in a large organisation, we do depend on the knowledge of the people in the organisation, like with Nessa in Respond. I couldn't know who to pick exactly. I could say to her, these are the sorts of people I want to see. I want to go across the board like this, diagonally and up and down. But I don't know really where people are and what they do. So in a large organisation, we tend to rely on the local knowledge to help it. So it's a partnership thing, really. We get together a list of people together. I trust the organisation to provide me with the names of people who provide the information I need. I just say, this is what I'd like to see. But I go over to Nessa and say, well, now you provide me with the names, then we'll discuss it and come together with a list.
Okay, I hope that, and thanks, Graham, for that. I hope that gives you a general idea of, it's not one size fits all, it's not dictatorial. We're open to hear what the organizations have to say, and we're all working for the one thing, to leave the organization in an improved place and in a positive feel after the assessor moves on and the organization continues hopefully to thrive and prosper. So any other questions? Kelly, can you go into the chat and see if there's anything in there? Or is anyone that'd like to put in now? Or maybe people could even come in, could we take them in on the microphone, or might that get a bit overwhelming?
I'm not seeing any questions just yet, Dermot.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, John, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not really, but it's been really great from my perspective to listen to the organisations. Obviously, I've done some of the paperwork for Peter and Nessa, and I remember Wendy's original presentation back at your conference in 2018, and it's great to see the benefit that a small organisation has actually gained from just going through the process. That's even without having the assessment yet, and how it put them in that strong position to grow and feel confident with their funders. So yeah, for me, it's been terrific, and thank you very much for arranging this, Dermot.
Thank you, John. And thanks to all of you for participating in it, and particularly all those who have joined in. And I hope you're taking something positive out of today. I suppose the thing that impressed me most is that you don't have to complete anything to get a benefit. Everything you do as an improvement stands to you. You complete the process to try and make it continuous improvement. So when you've done one thing and you find, yes, we've made one improvement there, yes, you will directly benefit from it. But quality and improvement is really about a continuum of a journey. It is not a destination in itself. I know that sounds like a cliche, but very much so. It is just, there's a guy, Vince Lombardi, and he's a great guru of mine. He worked with the Green Bay Packers, and they hadn't been, and he joined them in 1959. They had been 10 years without a win in the NFL in American football. And he is a hugely inspirational coach and leader. And he's deemed to be one of the most important coaches in any sport in the USA. And they've named the Super Bowl trophy after him. But he has left an awful lot of very wise quotes after him. And one is, perfection is unattainable, but it's only by aiming for it that we might get lucky and hit excellence. So I think that's something I just like to share with you all. I mean, that's where I think the whole continuous improvement and always trying to be better. I thought that's really what improving what it's about, always trying to be better. So if there is nothing else, again, thank you, Wendy, Nessa, Peter, John, Graham, and all the hosts of everybody else who was good enough to join us here this morning. And I think and Kelly, who kept us all on the road, looked after all the behind the scenes stuff so excellently. I want to thank you especially, Kelly. And with that, I'd like to bring the morning to a close, and thank you all for your attention and presence. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.